again, I am doing question 3 today of our discussions. The question is, why are educational and school psychologists more likely to follow an ecological model rather than a medical model? So first I want to start off with a definition of the ecological approach. It was first credited to Yuri von Brenner. I think I'm saying that correctly. So he had the idea that there are 4 interlocking levels of environment. The 4 levels included a microsystem, a mesosystem, exosystem, and macrosystems. So all 4 of these systems work together in unison for that person. So like everybody has their own ecological environment around them. Microsystems represent local environments where everyone lives their everyday lives, like your home, your school, daycare, work, just where you live. This is the system closest to the person and where they have the most direct contact, and includes family, peers, and caregivers. So it's not just the environments you're in, it's the people that are in them with you. The relationships in the microsystems are defined as mesosystems, like home and school interactions, such as relationships between parents and teachers. So like the interactions that you have with people are called microsystems. The mesosystem is the interaction between the different parts of a person's microsystem. Yes, I just said that. Oh, yes, I incorrectly said earlier, microsystems are the interactions. It's mesosystems, and mesosystems are located in the microsystem, and they are known as the interactions between different parts of a person's microsystem. Does that make sense? So like, the microsystem is the environment, and the meso is the people inside of your environment that you interact with. Good. Okay. So exosystems are the outside interactions that may not happen every day, and is a setting that does not involve the person as an active participant but still affects them. So an example of this is like school board decisions happening in schools. This still affects the student, but the student didn't have any part in the decision that the school board made. So that's an exosystem. Another good example of this is also like a parent getting a raise. The child doesn't have any say in the adult getting the raise. Their boss did, and they did that, and it was a separate decision. But it still affects them because now they may be moving to a different place if they can afford more. They may be getting more food now that the parent got a raise. Still something that affects them, but they didn't really have a part in deciding it. And finally, a macrosystem similarly influences people directly, but the large majority of people do not come in contact with these systems. So, like for example, No Child Left Behind Act is something that's decided like in and it influences people directly, and a large majority of people, not just like the one child who is affected by their parent getting a raise. Like it affects a lot of people, and us personally, we're not like a part of that decision unless you voted on the act. It's a bad example, but you get what I mean. It affects more than just one person. Changes in any part of the system influence the entire system. So these are pretty much 4 moving parts. Anything that happens within the system is going to affect another part of it, and interactions and your environment. So like for example, like the parent getting a raise, it might affect where the student lives and which school they go to if they move to a district where there's like they move houses because they got a raise and they want a bigger house, so they're changing house and school and people they interact with, and then it affects their friends, and then it affects so it affects different parts of the system. Okay, so now I'm going to go into the medical model. It's a more traditional approach to diagnosing patients. It focuses on the deficits of the patient and uses a problem-solving approach. According to Gutkin, I think that's how you say it, this is ineffective in educational psychology because it contributes to the problems in the American school system. The medical model focuses on internal illnesses and pathology. there is also a need for a population-based change if there's going to be any change in mental health and education predicaments facing children. So going about this with a medical model isn't very sufficient in changing anything that's happening in schools, because we need entire school changes for things to happen. And the medical model really focuses more on the individual and the problem at hand rather than prevention. And we'll get more into prevention when I talk about RTI later. But yeah. So since the medical model approach is more individualistic, it does not help the bigger picture problem in the education system. Prevention and early intervention treatments are the choice when facing pandemics. So like I said, prevention is probably more useful in educational psychology, since you want to prevent the problems rather than let them manifest into something worse and then have more work to do later. With the medical model, there is waiting for full-blown dysfunction to emerge before any interventions are developed. Rather than waiting, it would be better to preemptively look for things in the ecological model that may lead to mental illness. So that's kind of what I was saying before. The medical model uses Hold on. My thing is being weird. Okay. Medical model uses IDEA or the DSM during the assessment of referred students. The reliability and validity for these types of assessments are uncertain. As talked about in the last question that we did, the last one, last week, the last video I did, the DSM-5 has many failures, such as too many unnecessary diagnostic comorbidity, inadequate coverage, and inadequate scientific basis. This leads to weak diagnosis when using the medical model. So it's saying that not only is it only looking at individual things, but it's using outdated methods to assess students. So it's, at least according to Gutkin. But yeah. So this is often true in the school settings for interventions as well. The medical model has school psychologists and related clinicians spending much of their time using diagnoses from IDEA or the DSM-5 that leads to the treatment programs emerging from the medical model being less effective and insufficient for the client's needs. So like I was saying before. So those are kind of the two definitions. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the ecological model now. So coming back to the ecological model, the Bronfenbrenners, I hope I'm saying that right, conceptualize micro, meso, exo, and macro environment can increase opportunities to focus on populations rather than just individuals. Focusing even on just the macro environment can spur change in larger populations. Moving towards an ecological approach rather than the medical can serve universal, selective, and indicated populations. According to Gutkin, moving into the meso, exo, and macro systems, there is even greater possibility of change and is parallel to the public health strategy. So what I mean by public health strategy is kind of like public health that the government has set up for us. So trying to help the majority of people all at the same time rather than just looking at one person at a time. So that kind of goes with that. One of the downfalls of the medical model is that it is not put into place until deficits have already occurred. With the ecological approach, prevention and early intervention are more straightforward and do not wait until it is too late. Human behavior is affected by ecological model, and any psychoeducational change within the system can be caused by strong influence. This can be accomplished by serving students before they have failed one or more academic subjects. Prevention and early intervention can be achieved by adopting empirically validated teaching methods in schools, classroom, and homes before problems arise or when early signs of academic distress are present. And that was a direct quote from Gutkin, 2012. It is thought that a change can empower multiple people in an ecological system. It enables them to provide prevention, early intervention, and remediation services. So basically, Gutkin is saying that we need to be using empirically based evidence to serve kids, 1, and 2, we need to be doing prevention things that can help, like RTI, which I'll talk about later, and early interventions, making sure that we're catching the problems before they start. Kind of like prevention, but they're already showing signs of it. Okay, so moving on. Hold on, it is really hot in here. Sorry. Okay. So moving on. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about RTI and how that can be used to prevent certain deficits before they actually happen. RTI is used in schools as a preventative measure for learning and behavior problems. There are 3 tiers to RTI. Tier 1 involves problem-solving efforts to address known causes of learning problems by providing protection against the onset of the problems. So Tier 1 is mostly preventative, and it's school-wide policies that can help everyone. Tier 2 accelerates progress learning a skill in the context of a delay. So Tier 2 is more like, oh, we're seeing that this person is delayed, we need to help them and get early interventions. Finally, Tier 3 houses the existing problem and helps to prevent from the problem getting worse. So Tier 3 is where people who already have existing problems go and they get help that they need and interventions to kind of maintain the problem. And you can move through these levels. You don't have to stay like students can move through these levels throughout. And I honestly think it's a very good system and it works pretty well from the research I've done. To achieve the prevention goals of RTI, schools must be organized and staffed differently than traditional schools. Ecological conditions such as unified school-wide practices, the multiple tiers, evidence-based practices, systematic use of progress monitoring for decision-making, and dynamic flow of students within and across tiers of services are needed in schools that implement RTI. So, schools that have RTI are not just like focusing on these 3 tiers. There's some things that go into them. So, one of the most important things I think is having evidence-based practices, and the medical model sometimes doesn't use those. And that's why I think the ecological model is a more sound thing to use in educational psychology, because it's not proven, but is backed up. Like, it's empirically based, and we're not just doing whatever, just based off of like what we're watching. And it makes decisions based off systematic progress monitoring. So they're monitoring their students pretty closely and making sure that everybody's getting what they need, even though they're looking at the big picture. And the dynamic flow of students within and across tiers. So you can move within these tiers, and they're making sure that they're in schools like this. They're making sure that these kids are being monitored across the tiers and making sure that like they're either making progress through the tiers to finally get to Tier 1 or Tier 2, or they're being placed correctly into the tier that they need to be in, because if they already have pre-existing diagnoses of something that you know of, they're going to be in Tier 3, but you're going to help them in that tier. From an ecological standpoint, RTI affects relationships in the mesosystem of its students because it involves all students, teachers, administration, and parents. So RTI affects not only the school, but parents and home life, which is really cool, and it's following the ecological model. The RTI school model needs unified approaches of practice from all interactions within the mesosystems to achieve results that it is intended to reach. One school-wide goal that should be important to identify the students with higher needs of intervention because they have higher risks. So you're going to want to find the students that have higher risks first. Another goal would be using evidence-based intervention practices. This is kind of what I talked about earlier. There must be an administrative buy-in for RTI to work, which means that getting the administration on board is another school-wide goal. So you need teachers to all be on the same page, and this be a school-wide thing that you're doing. Not just like a few teachers doing it and other teachers are like, well, not in my classroom, you know? As mentioned earlier, one change anywhere in an ecological system affects the entire system. Some ecological changes that may occur when using RTI include more teachers having a unified approach to school practices, which is what I just said, students being assessed consistently, more professional development seminars for teachers, and better communication line for consultation of practices amongst professionals. So really just getting people talking about it in school and making sure everybody's really on the same page about everything. Greenwood contends that RTI models need a systematic way to assess progress of an individual to collect valuable data that can be used in deciding whether the individual is making progress. The measures used to collect this data can promote changes in the tiers for the student and change their microecology for periods of instruction throughout the day. So, that's saying that they're changing their environments throughout the day and, yeah. Or just changing tiers. That would really change their environment because they'd be in different classrooms. Anyways, some ecological changes that may happen during transition from one tier to the next is the student having one-on-one or small group instruction, and again, more assessment of progress. So like I said, like being in different tiers puts you in different environments. Tier 3 probably has more one-on-one. Tier 2 maybe has like smaller to medium-sized groups, and Tier 1 is more general population. So moving forward, give me 1 second. This next article is talking about organizational consultation, and I'll just find that in a little bit here. The article reviews school-based organizational consultations that are based around the ecological model. According to Myers, to serve children in the best way, educational psychologists need to offer effective services to the educational systems the children are inside of. Therefore, treatment should look past the individual learner and address systematic factors that include learning environments, curriculum, school climate, and school and district policies. Myers defines a school-based organizational consultation as a relationship in which a team of consultants works within a system, school or school district in an effort to promote growth and solve problems affecting the student, staff, or parents, community members affected by the system. School-based organizational consultants are utilized by intervening at the systems level to facilitate effective organizational functioning. When utilizing school-based organizational consultations can be used to focus on the child to find what works to change behaviors by changing things in the environment. Consultations that are narrowed on the teacher or the systems find places to change within the system that benefit the child or the student. Myers claims that compared to other models, such as the medical model, the ecological model focuses less on the individual and considers the context, systems, and organization in which the individual functions. So again, it's more looking past like, oh, this kid has a problem, we need to fix it, and it's looking at the things around that child and what else is going on in that child's life. The ecological model does this while also still recognizing the importance of the features, needs, and views of the individual who live within the system. And I think that sentence is really important because I feel like ecological model says a lot of times like, oh, we're looking at the general population, and then people are like, well, then why do we have IEPs? Why do we assess students individually? Well, the ecological model does more general population kind of things, and it's reiterated with that all the time, but it also is looking at the individual. So it's doing both, and I think it's really looking at like that child's ecological needs, like looking past just what the child's doing in that behavior, but more like what environment are they in, what school are they in, what kind of policies are going on in the school, and like what kind of things may have led to this child acting like that. And it's more preventative because you're looking at things before it gets out of hand. So I think that's really good about the ecological model. So Gudkin and Myers both agree people and organizations work together and influence each other. The zone of proximal development are areas that are beyond the immediate environment around you. It is suggested that people in an organization can learn or change because of the support given in the areas in the proximal development. Organizational consultants often give support needed to achieve enhanced learning. This is called scaffolding because just like in construction, knowledge is built on prior basis of knowledge. So you're building upon knowledge that you already have, which is really good. Okay, so lastly, give me 1 second. Yes, service delivery can also be distributed in a 3-tier model. This model, and I don't know if these are the same thing. I think they are, but they're named differently, so I'm going to describe this to you. This model emphasizes universal system-level interventions as the first line of defense against mental health and learning problems in children. The three-tiered model represents a medical health outlook on school-based service delivery. What this means is that the three-tiered model is looking at the bigger picture rather than one individual at a time in the school. Prevention is thought to be linked with the ecological model. As Greenwood claimed, prevention of the problem helps the child before they have the problem. This is important to educational and school psychologists because using an ecological model in school could prevent problems before they manifest into bigger problems that are harder to intervene on because of the multiple factors that may go into them. Having school-wide evidence-based curricula may help to prevent low achievement. The medical model uses a more individualized notion of treatment where the problem must first show itself and then be fixed. Therefore, educational psychologists use the ecological models more often than medical models, or at least they should. So that's what I have answered here. So yeah, that's all I have for y'all. Bye.